Hello, friends. Welcome to a new style of episodes where we discuss and speculate about the lore of a given race within the world of Gloomhaven. Now, before beginning, I need to warn those that are interested in keeping spoilers secret that spoilers will be discussed. Anything from unlocked characters to their cards, to scenarios and their monsters. And bosses are fair game. And another quick comment, this is not meant to be a guide of any kind. This is meant to be a discussion to flesh out the lore given to us within the board game, the digital version, and Cephalofair's website. Now let's begin. Today I am joined by my friend Andy, who has joined me on some episodes for the Guildmaster campaign. So welcome, Andy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome back. After some of our scenarios, Andy had thought of this idea to have these discussions, so I'll let him introduce the first race that we will be discussing today.
There's a lot of worlds to Gloomhaven, and it just so happened that we were playing two Savvas characters, so we thought it would be a good place to start talking about Savvas as a race and the culture and characters to play.
And you pronounced it correctly. It is pronounced Savvas. Also, there is no plurals for Savvas, so it is a Savvas or many Savvas. And we will start the discussion on their most prominent feature, their skin. I'm sure that most people at this point understand that Savvas are a sentient rock people. So their skin is made of rocks, very craggy and rough skin, except for their chest, which is made of glass. And it's kind of that makes the Savvas who they are, is what is inside their chest. One more thing about that is that they are genderless. They are its.
Yeah, and they reproduce asexually. So the way that they reproduce, it's actually like this ritual, this ceremony that they have. And what they do is they take the strongest person in their tribe or their community and they shatter them. They break them down into tiny shards, and then each shard grows and becomes an individual Savvas. It says that they grow fairly quickly into a full adult Savvas, but it makes me wonder a little bit like what goes into that ritual process. Does every shard of a Savvas grow into a new Savvas? Like when you're fighting one and you're breaking them into little bits, does each one of those bits become a Savvas? Or is there something you have to do, like part of that ritual, like you have to put some energy into the shards so that they can grow up and become like another Savvas? We talk about the Savvas as being made out of stone or appear to be made out of stone. And I think there's, and maybe not an analog, but something similar that we see generally in fantasy and specifically in Gloomhaven, beings that are made out of stone. We've got stone golems and elementals, like stone or earth elementals. In the case of golems, those are usually like formation of rocks or a statue that is animated to perform some task. Usually it's pretty simple, just like defend this area. Elementals, I think in Gloomhaven, demons kind of are more like elementals and less like demons, just because they're like a raw manifestation of the elements. But I think a difference between Savvas and the golems and the demons or elementals is they're more sentient. They know what's going on around them. But I'm not sure where to draw the line with that. We don't know exactly what the origin story, like where did they come from? How were Savvas created? Were they evolved from a rock, or were they originally a rock that was like given life by a god or a magician or something like that, gave them power that way? But the alternative to that is something just like his general appearance. Like you see that he can move. Like there's something moving inside of him. That I think there's more than just rock there. So he could be like the Thing from Fantastic Four. He starts as a human, but then he undergoes this mutation. He gets hit by radiation or something, and he's covered in this rock-like flesh. So his outside is rocks, but his insides are still like a human, just like a person. So maybe they're more biological beings that just happen to look like rocks on the outside. But as I'm trying to debate these two, like what is it actually like to be a Savvas? We see in their reproduction ceremony that they shatter them and make them shards of rock. You don't break their skin off and make them skinless animals. So I think it's more that they're made out of rocks, and they're rocks given life, or maybe they're something that's more like a fungus that evolved to a point of sentience, because there's a lot of funguses or plants have an ability that if you break them apart into tiny pieces, then each of those pieces can grow together. So maybe they're just like this really complicated fungus that is able to absorb energy, and instead of being like the funguses that we're used to are kind of soft, they just have a thicker, like harder chitinous shell going on.
I like that. It was kind of hard for me to imagine what was within a Savvas, so I kind of just didn't do it. But but I like that the idea that it's a rock-like fungus. I think there is something there, even if they might not necessarily be a fungus in the way that we think of like a lichen or a mushroom, or other kinds or other types of fungus. That it's basically a rock fungus in the world of Gloomhaven that we just don't have here, so we can't understand it. And that through time, likely thousands of years, which isn't very much time for them, that they grew a consciousness, so probably over hundreds of thousands of years, grew that consciousness to become a community of Savvas.
I also would be perfectly happy with the origin story that's just like, so we have a similar origin story in real myth and in Dungeons and Dragons. I think dwarfs, or maybe this is Tolkien, but you can make beings out of mud, or the gods can put mud together and then give life to it and transform it into a living thing. And that's the origin story, the myth behind how humans or something human-like came to be. But maybe it's just a more basic version of that, somewhere in between animating rocks to make a golem and using mud to make a human. You have somewhere in between there, like it was intentionally designed by someone or something to just give life to this thing that didn't have life before. And how it works doesn't really matter. It's just, it's magic, or it's close to biological, or something like that. It's just how it is.
Very interesting, deep thought on that. To be sacrificed is one of the greatest honors, and it's the highest goal of a Savvas, to become basically the chosen one, which means that the thing that Savvas value over everything is power, and not just power, but to display that power. After a baby Savvases emerge from the pile of rubble of breaking the most powerful Savvas apart, they grow to like the near human size pretty quickly. And during that time, they are studying feverishly to master an element, at least one element. but to master more than one element is their goal. Holding just one element to them would be, I guess, enough to become an adult Savvas, but not enough to be the chosen one.
So the name Savvas, you might have noticed, is similar to the word savant. I've seen that used in a couple of articles. And I think there's a connection there between the word Savvas and savant. I think that's supposed to be a clue from the creator that Savvas, like a savant, are experts in one thing, the thing that they focus on. It's an important part of their culture to study the one element or the elements that they want to be the best at and be the most powerful with. So since they're only using one Savvas to carry on the whole next generation, you get less variation in if it's DNA or whatever it is. We do see that one Savvas, when they're shattered, they grow up into different Savvas that have maybe different personalities or different abilities. But this process of always taking the strongest Savvas and making them the next generation, it could do two things. It could be like concentrating that ability, and we see this in breeding. When you try to breed for one trait, like, you get that trait, but the problem is you also lose all that variety. So you end up with something that is uniform. It's too much similar all the time. So maybe Savvas have lost something in these generations and generations of trying to breed themselves towards one certain thing. Like, maybe Savvas started out and there was like all these different types of Savvas, and there was fire Savvas and rock Savvas, and it just happened that like they kept picking the ones with the toughest skin and the most elemental abilities. And maybe if you stretched out time, you could see Savvas coming from something that was totally different from what they are now.
Yeah, I wondered about what they actually passed down. So if they took the strongest, let's say that the Elementalist is sacrificed for the greater good of producing more Savvas. What of the Elementalist is passed down to the baby Savvas or the next generation? Do they see that as like they're coming from the Elementalist, or are they just pieces of rock that are reanimated or animated through the ceremony that produces another, that just creates another Savvas from a rock? And if that's the case, then choosing the strongest one shouldn't matter at all if nothing is passed down, unless it's just for the sake of a ritual to take the strongest. They've lived their whole life, and this is the last honor for them to be sacrificed, to be for the greater good of the Savvas community, and nothing is passed down.
I like both ideas, that something does get passed down, and that the children Savvas sort of take something from the one that's sacrificed. Or it would be a cruel irony that their whole plan, like their whole purpose in life, is to be this super powerful Savvas, so that they can get passed down, and then in reality it's meaningless because the shards of the new baby Savvas just take on whatever abilities. It has nothing to do with the one that's sacrificed.
Right. And then so where did the Cragheart come from? Potentially that wasn't the strongest Savvas if let's say that one generation had an increase in Craghearts. Does that mean that they made the wrong choice?
Oh yeah.
Or is that just culling the weak relative to the strength of all of them around them? And even though it is a strong Savvas, it's not as strong as the ones around them, so they're removing the weak anyway. I mean, there's going to have to be a weak one every time, no matter what. Are there multiple Craghearts every generation? They take the bottom 5% and say you're weak Craghearts and exile them? Or is this like a rate through choosing the best versus maybe not the best candidate to be sacrificed?
When the Savvas does master one of these elements, they get a power core of that element added into their glassy sort of chest cavity. There's a little bit of ambiguity. I'm not sure how this works. If in their mastery they're growing the power core, like creating it within themselves, or if there's something plastic about it, like you can create or you find the elemental power core and you actually insert it into their chest so it becomes part of them. And I like it either way, and I'm not sure what the right answer is.
Yeah, I don't know either. I guess I was thinking more along the line of being installed rather than more organic, like growing inside of them. But I do like that idea. My thought was that if it was something that was installed into their chest, so as they're practicing and learning and trying to master one or more of these elements, I was picturing that it was okay, they have mastered it, and this power core is installed basically as their ceremony, their welcome into adulthood after the 20 years or so of trying to master that element. In which case it could be taken away if that's the case. So if they were to break a law or do something that wasn't seen as like a normal Savvas behavior, that the power core could be taken away from them.
So we know that not everyone can be a master. Like if everyone's a master, then nobody's a master, right? So part of this tradition is everyone wants to be the strongest, they want to be the best, and anybody who's not like meeting the expectations, they sort of cull the weaker Savvas. They take them and they crush the glass chest cavity and they shun them from the community. So that Savvas has to go out and just try to survive on their own. And because their chest has been crushed and is just a hole, they are known as crag hearts.
And this is one of the first 6 characters that is playable in Gloomhaven, the Cragheart. And in the case of the Cragheart, in the images of him, they all show his chest basically as a black cavity rather than the glowing glass showcase that the Elementalist has put on display. So the display has been removed from the Cragheart so that the Cragheart doesn't have that choice anymore. He's unable to go out into the world and continue his studies or in trying to master any one of the natural elements.
There's something interesting I think about the Cragheart is that it's not like he doesn't have any elemental power. He's got a lot of earth abilities that either use or create earth elements. And so I wonder if there's other Craghearts out there who have been training with different elements, or if there's something about like the Savvas they look like rock people, maybe they have a natural affinity to earth element more than some of the other elements.
Yeah, I think I did find that even though they're not a master of any elements, there is still a draw of power that all Savvas are born with, that they are linked to the earth and the power that it can create.
And he also has a little bit of wind element, I think. So I think that gives the idea that maybe the Cragheart, he's got earth element, he's got some wind element. Like that's supposed to be really good for Savvas to be able to master 2 different elements, certainly. But maybe just like he's got some capability of both of those elements. It could be like you were saying before. Maybe this Cragheart wasn't just like a bad student. Maybe he did something in his past that was punished, by taking away his powers and crushing his glass chest.
Yeah, so there are two abilities and they're X cards, so you can choose them from the beginning, but they are both burned cards. One of them is an AoE attack where he can disarm and deal some damage to 3 enemies, or up to 3 enemies, and it produces some air. And then the other is where if air is strong or waning, he can consume it to add 2 range, and that he can do this 6 times within a scenario. I was kind of picturing him as being a student of the air element, but he couldn't really control it the way that, in a way to master it. This was kind of his goal, was to become an air master, but then along the way either was distracted, maybe he wasn't a good student, maybe he was put down at an early age so that he wouldn't have the opportunity to become a good student either. But those are the only 2 abilities cards that are available to him for that. And even then, basically that persistent ability of if it's strong or waning, air element is strong or waning, then he can add to his range. If he can only produce it once, then basically it's not really an ability that he can use every scenario unless he's with somebody that can produce air, or if he has an item that can produce air from time to time. It's as if that he, like, this was his goal or a thought that he wanted to become an air master, but he couldn't, like, it wasn't there. And then the fact that they crushed his chest, maybe he carried this forward and was able to call on air or consume it and infuse it, but not to the extent that he really wanted to.
And it's such a powerful attack to start out with. So you might ask, like, if you can just give anyone a power source, does that make them more powerful with that element? Why not just give all of your Savvas power cores of all 4? And even if they can't use it that well, maybe you could just like build up this like super powerful army that has not mastery, but like can just lash out with all of their elements.
So I think maybe something to that effect is why the Cragheart wasn't trusted, is because he's kind of like Hulk. He has very little care or control on what's in his path. He's just moving in that direction. And if it's his friends or enemies in his path, he doesn't really care. Or maybe he doesn't have the control to be able to care. So if they just gave all of these Craghearts the Savvas that they were going to crush, becoming the Craghearts, if they just gave them the power to begin with, then they might not be able to wield it in a way and enough control that he does more harm than helping.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think it could go either way. Either he doesn't have control of it, or he's just like maybe not that he wants to hurt people, maybe he just doesn't know how, or either he can't control it or he's just not used to being around people. So Craghearts have spent at least some of their life shunned and pushed out of their Savvas society. Sometimes they can find a place out in the world, but a lot of them are sort of these lone wolves who have to make their way in the world by themselves. And I don't know how true this is, like in the real world, but there's this romantic idea of the lone wolf. The adversity that you face by yourself makes you stronger, and just the fact that he was shunned and pushed out into the wilderness to take care of himself was actually the catalyst that made him become what he is. Because we see, compared to some of the other characters that you can play, he's got a ton of hit points, so he can take a lot of damage, and he's kind of a jack of all trades. He can do melee, He can do range, he can do healing, he can do area of effect. He's a very well-rounded character, and I think that probably came from not having any support from anybody. He's just out there on his own, and he had to figure out how to deal with that.
That's beautiful. No, that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I was picturing him as being, you know, anyone that's in exile is probably not going to trust many people around him. So being on his own has is basically something that he was forced into. And I also knew, or would think of him as that Swiss Army knife kind of character, that jack of all trades, where he can become whatever you want him to be. If you want a tank that's going to do melee damage, he can do that. He can crush and create rock obstacles around the rooms. He can move and deal, like, make the enemies suffer damage rather than physical attacks. And then, of course, the ranged attacks. So if you want him to go in any direction, he can. He can be a support player. He can be the melee tank, if that's what you want him to be. But I like the picture that you painted with being that lone wolf, and he had to become the jack of all trades because he was exiled.
Yeah, so maybe he learned these talents that just destroy everything in his path, or maybe he isn't aware that when he throws these rock boulders around that he's accidentally gonna put his friends in danger.
Yeah.
But in either case, like, you can either be a jerk with him and be like, oh, sorry guys, this is gonna hurt, or you have to be like very careful with him to control him so that you're not damaging your own characters.
And by being too careful, I could see him dealing less damage.
Can I tell you about my favorite ability of the Craghearts?
Yeah, of course.
Rock Slide. He throws out 3 obstacles within a range of 4, and anybody adjacent to it takes 2 damage. The Cragheart was my first character who I played in the board game, and he had an impossible personal quest, and so I was stuck with him for a very long time. And I started to get like a little bit bored of him because his attack that is guaranteed to do damage. You never don't hit with this. If they've got shield, it still hits. If they've got a ton of health, it still hits. If you have a bunch of curses, it always hits. It's such a good attack. And also, you can use it to use the obstacles to like block the enemy from getting to you, and you can set yourself up for other attacks that use obstacles. Rock Slide is just such a good skill for him.
Even the bottom part of that being move 6, even though it has to be in a straight line, it's not a burn card, and he can move 6. So if done correctly, he can run across the map very quickly. And that's something that he's not good at, is running far. As a society, the Savvas look down on other races of the world because they don't have the mastery of the elements that they view as a mastery, basically. And they also feel like they're not treated with the respect that they deserve. Like, they put themselves on the pedestal, and they expect that everyone around them, whether they've mastered one element or all 4 elements, they feel that they deserve the respect because of that. And that's, again, going back to the power cores being on display so that everybody can see them. But they don't see that the other races give that respect to them. So they look down at other races. But I'm wondering how the Cragheart feels about this. Does he still, and I expect the answer is no, but does he still demand the respect from these other races, even though he's the weakest of potentially the strongest race of the world of Gloomhaven? or because he's exiled, he just doesn't think he deserves any respect from anybody. And maybe that's why he doesn't care about who he hurts around him.
Yeah, lonely Cragheart. We're also told that sometimes Savvas will live among other races, and sometimes their mastery gives them really useful abilities. You can imagine someone with all these earth elemental power can just like build a tower, build a castle, or some sort of structure, and just be a really useful part of a society. But we're also told that that's very rare. They prefer to stick with their own people.
Yeah, it says that they frown upon it too, which I found interesting. Even though they're helping these other races that might actually give them the respect they deserve, that they think they deserve, but helping them is basically lowering themselves to that level. That's not their level, even though it might gain the respect from their races by helping them.
So the Elementalist, that's a guy who a lot of people respect. Am I right?
Yeah, yeah. I have here that he's the creme de la creme de la creme. Yeah, he certainly demands respect from everybody, everyone around him, whether they are Savvas or not. He demands their respect because he has mastered all four of the natural elements: ice, fire, air, and earth. And you also do have an option for pursuing light and darkness elements. You can do one or the other or both. Somewhere in the text it says that typically it's not pursued. They will stick to the natural elements and not stay away from light and darkness, but the mastering light and darkness is not typically an option. And I'm wondering if that's by choice, saying like we come from nature, Savvas come from nature, so that they will master only natural elements, or is it them showing that they are neutral in a way that light being good and darkness being bad? It could be the fact that they're kind of like in Lord of the Rings, for instance, the treants. If they're not being harmed, then they're not going to do harm. They're going to stay away from the laws of man and live their own life in the forest. So with the Savvas, without pursuing light and darkness, it's showing that they're being neutral to the laws of the other races. But there is a third option that Andy came up with.
Yeah, so there is one Savvas who we meet in a side quest. He's the boss of the level, and you basically storm into his dungeon, and your goal is to kill him. But you find out when you meet him that he has a power core of light and dark, and it's just a couple of lines in the description in the introduction, but you surmise, like you're guessing that the reason that this guy is a bad guy and he's started to go mad because it's unnatural for Savvas to master the light and the dark, and that could be for the reasons that you were just describing.
Yeah, I really like this idea because I don't want to say that light and dark are unnatural, unearthly, because light, comes from the sun, and wherever the sun isn't, there is darkness. However, the fact that this boss, goes insane because he has mastered these two elements that are unnatural for normal Savvas to attempt to master.
And when I was looking into this, I noticed that the Elementalist, I haven't played him very much, but the Elementalist, I thought that his he's just got like a couple of cards here and there, and some more cards at higher levels that start to use some of that light and dark. And I wasn't sure if that meant that he was like strong enough that he could deal with those and balance those a little bit, or if that was something that was like pulling him. Like we should be a little bit worried about the Elementalist. Like, oh no, he's he's using light and dark element. Like we don't use light and dark element like that. That's not healthy for us to do. Like, why is the Elementalist? He's got the four. Like, I know he's super powerful. Why is he tempting fate by trying to play with light and dark? He's gonna go crazy. Like we know that Savvas do, and when they work with light and dark.
That's awesome. That's hilarious. Because I kind of saw it in a different way, and now you're convincing me in another way. Before the light and darkness madness of the boss, then I was thinking of it as like a good thing. Hey, this guy he's mastered all four of the natural elements, and it's become like too powerful and doesn't know what else to do with its life, so it basically decides, there's these other two elements that I could attempt to use, to wield, maybe not master, but attempt to wield it. But I like the way that you're thinking that that is going like a little crazy. The Elementalist has already done everything that could possibly do with his life, so he's joining this mercenary band to show off the power that it has produced and throughout his life. And now it's saying like maybe too powerful because it's tempted by the light and the dark elements. Is the Elementalist a future chosen one?
Yeah, I think he might be, or at least he's aspiring to, right?
I'd like to think that, but the fact that he's joined a mercenary band suggests that he might be angry with Savvas culture, and potentially the thought that you were going with, that light and darkness drives them insane. Maybe the Elementalist would have been the chosen one, but was shunned because of its draw to light and darkness mastery. And so maybe at the beginning, maybe the Elementalist would have been the kind of perfect candidate to be the chosen one, but either because of insanity or just the disapproval of using or attempting to master light and darkness, maybe the Elementalist was shunned and won't be the future chosen one.
Maybe it was a choice that he made, and it's like the last king, like Aragorn. They want him to be the one. Look at you, you're the guy, but he's that rare dissenter who's like, oh man, this whole system's wrong, man. I'm not your king. I'm not the future of Savvas. I just want to live and I want to go experience the world. The other tinfoil hat idea I had about the Elementalist was comparing him to the Spellweaver, and I don't want to get too into it, but they're both, like, of the characters who I've seen and played, they have a lot of different elements that they're using, a lot of magic compared to some of the brute strength and technical skills that other characters have. They're two very magical characters you can play. But the Spell Weaver, it reminds me of a Wheel of Time, and they talk about the magic system in those books as you have the elements and you mix them together in interesting ways, and you can do really creative, tricky things by weaving the elements together. That's how I think of the Spell Weaver, because she's got some like really interesting abilities. But the Elementalist, from what I've seen, he's like, okay, I'm going to use fire and I'm going to burn and I'm going to do a lot of damage, or I'm going to use ice and I'm going to stun or I'm going to do a lot of damage. and that elementalism, I think, is like focusing on one element at a time, and he can combine them, but he doesn't like combine them together in creative ways. He's like, okay, fire to burn and ice to stun, both of the elements at the same time, doing only what those elements do, not trying to be tricky with it, just being like, I'm powerful. Like, I'm not tricky, I'm powerful, and watch what I can do.
When it comes to the Elementalist, quite a few of the cards he can use more than one element at a time. But the two that jump out at me are Raw Enhancement and Pure Augmentation. They're both kind of average. They're 48 initiative, and the top is a range attack, and the bottom is move. So basically the top is consuming 2 elements to add to the attack, and the bottom is consuming up to 2 elements to add to the move. It's not really doing much. It's just making his move more powerful or his attack more powerful. He also has one Formless Power, which will basically, the top action is attack 2, range 2, and he can consume any 2 elements, up to 2 elements, to add to the range and the attack. However, he does have a few of these cards that it's basically like attack at range, and then you can consume any of the 4 natural elements to do something with the attack. Fire adds to the attack power, wind or air will push, earth targets a second, and ice will stun. And I think an X card does something similar to that, where the move becomes a more powerful move and sometimes even a shield, whereas the top action is, an attack 0 at range 2, but adding more and more of these elements, he gets to make that more powerful, being another target, poison, immobilize, wound. Whereas the Spellweaver has ways of making her powerful in a different way, where she can, for instance, block out 2 attacks that target her.
Yeah, ice armor, right? It's not something
ice armor
you really expect from such like a frail character. You can use that in interesting ways that it's just a very different strategy from how you use the Elementalist, I think.
Right. And in that way, I think, going to where you're kind of trying to separate them, I think of the Elementalist as being independent, not for the same reason that the Cragheart is independent, but still independent and selfish. The Elementalist being more selfish than the Spellweaver. The Spellweaver is there. She wants to help the others around her by doing some controlling moves and being a bit more tricky, a bit more creative with the elements. Whereas the Elementalist is just like, when I move strong, or I move far. If I attack hard. Now there are some other cards later when he levels up that do help him a little bit, but it's not necessarily helping anybody else. He doesn't have a lot of healing cards that heal others. There are some that you can choose later. I think he does start with an option with one. Brilliant Flash is a heal card that he can heal others, but he has some cards that just heal himself.
Yeah, I think some of his abilities kind of reflect, compared to the Cragheart, where I was saying that Cragheart is strong because he had to be self-sufficient. The Elementalist has been revered as like the strongest of their people, so he's probably had like a lot of people around him just like brown-nosing, lifting him up, and he certainly is powerful, but he's also pretty dependent on the people around him. And when you start out with the Elementalist and he doesn't have that many cards with him, like he has a pretty hard time getting started and putting all the mana out into the air. So I think he does much better in a group that supports him and puts that mana out there and protects him a little bit from the outside because he's got such low health. He shows the opposite side of that Savvas culture.
No, I can certainly see that. It makes sense to pair the Spellweaver with the Elementalist because they can go off of each other with like helping each other out, even within the same round or into the future round. But from a role playing standpoint, I think that the Elementalist might be I don't want to say impressed by the Spellweaver, but might actually give her a chance to speak a little bit. But the Elementalist is still going to see itself as the higher power, and if she's helping, it's because that's what she should be doing.
Yeah, they've definitely got something in common.
Mm-hmm.
But we have closer, more similar monsters that we can look at and consider. And I only know like the basics about them. I think you looked into them closer, but we fight some.
The lava flow?
And the ice storm, right?
Correct. Right, so these two monsters, only two of them are Savvas. The lava flow, which has mastered fire and earth, and the ice storm, which have mastered the ice and air. And in mastering two of the elements, the natural elements, they also have the power to summon demons of those elements, which can make them a huge pain to fight. Now, it takes a lot of power to summon, so it takes an entire round. They summon with initiatives of 97 and 98, and infusing and consuming these elements. Typically, it's the more common use of fire, meaning more damage, or earth, meaning a second target, or immobilize. Wounding also for fire. Whereas the ice storm, ice and air, is helping with healing and pushing. I thought they would have disarm and stun, but they don't actually. But I find it interesting that the lava flow have these, the fire and earth, and then the other with ice and air, but that the Elementalist has cards that uses one of each. So he can actually use fire and air, or ice and earth, which is kind of another way to prove that it is higher than these lava flow and puny ice storms. Even though when the other characters fight these two monsters, they are extremely dangerous and hard to manage.
I think the pairing that they have, the fire and earth and air and water, makes sense. And I wonder if there's something about those elements that go together better. And maybe that was a problem that the Cragheart was having, is that he was trying to do a weird combination of earth and wind, and he's got tornadoes, but that's about it. His two elements that he's working with aren't very conducive to combine like that.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about the compatibility of the elements, because certainly the Spellweaver is using fire and ice, which certainly should not be compatible, but she can handle both at the same time. But the fact that the Elementalist, I think it's almost funny the way that he was designed, because it's as if every card is him proving how strong he is, either consuming, he can consume and infuse elements in the same round. He can infuse multiple elements in the same round. I've actually had him infuse all of the natural elements within one round, and then in the next round consume them all, which is a very fun move when you can put it in that way. Of course, mana potions and enhancements help him a lot with infusing elements into the rooms. But when you can do it, you can almost see the hubris in the card when you play it. It's like, and take that kind of feeling that you can do everything that's on that card makes you even feel like you are that elementalist, that you are above everybody else at the table.
So there's one more Savvas that we haven't mentioned that's a monster that we fight. He's the lieutenant of the prime demon, and there's a whole path where you go and fight through all the demons and you fight the prime demon. But at one point you fight his lieutenant, and I think it's after you fight and beat the prime demon. But he's this powerful Savvas, and I think he's a special named character, and he's got basically the cards of one of the Savvas, but with special abilities that are scenario specific. Like, he's trying to get back at you for killing the prime demon, but after you defeat him, you cut off his head, and his head becomes an item that you can use to curse people. I really enjoyed that part of that, the story of taking his head and using it.
Right. Yeah, I forgot about that guy. Yeah, I loved that storytelling part of that scenario where you actually gain an item. Now, there are a lot of items that you gain just from scenarios, and they're very fun and exciting when you get them. But to carry the head of... He's not a boss, he's just a named enemy, right?
Yeah.
To carry his head into future battles for the sole purpose of using it against the enemy was both hilarious and fascinating, amazing to look back and be like, I remember where I got that head. Well, that was quite a discussion. And not only did I learn new things along the way, but I also had a lot of fun. So I want to say thanks to Andy, not only for this great idea, but for the great discussion that we just had. And I hope that we can potentially have more conversations like this into the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun. It's nice to be able to share all my crazy theories.
Yeah, some of them were pretty crazy, but I enjoyed them nonetheless. And so for those of you watching, if this is something you would like to see more of, then please hit the like and subscribe and continue the discussion in the comment section below. There are potentially things that we missed or you'd like to hear more of or share for yourself. So I hope to see you there.